Did you know that Rome was 8 times more densely populated than modern New York? That's right. The city of Rome during its peak in the 1st century AD had around 1 million inhabitants crammed into just 18 square miles. By comparison, modern New York has about 11,000 people per square mile. And even in the late Republic, when Rome was already starting to sprawl out over the 7 hills, it still had around 500,000 people per square mile. We think of ancient Rome as this huge, sprawling metropolis, but actually it was incredibly dense, comparable to modern Manhattan or maybe even more so. So if you were an average Roman walking around, what would you see? Well, today, we're going to explore the world's first great metropolis. Rome is one of the most famous cities in the entire world. But have you ever wondered where the name Rome even comes from? We don't know for sure, but scholars believe that the name Rome derives from the Latin word for strength, or perhaps it may have been named after the nearby Tiber River's rapid currents, which in Latin is called Remus. We do know that long before Rome became a major power in Italy, 7 small villages known as the 7 Kings of Rome supposedly ruled the area. But these stories are likely mythological in nature. According to Livy, the legendary founder of the city was a Trojan prince named Aeneas, who fled to Italy after the destruction of Troy and eventually established the settlement of Laurentum, which later grew into Rome. It wasn't until the 6th century BC that Rome began to expand beyond the boundaries of the original 7 hills and into the surrounding region of Latium. The Romans would go on to conquer all of central Italy and eventually the entire Mediterranean world, creating one of the largest empires in history. And with all of that land to manage, Rome needed a good transportation system. If you've ever visited Rome or seen pictures of it, then you probably noticed how hilly the city is. This made building roads quite challenging, but the Romans were up to the task. They constructed a series of paved roads called the Via Sacra that connected important government buildings and wound around the hills. These roads would eventually be lined with shops and other commercial enterprises, turning them into Rome's first shopping street. To help connect the rest of the city, the Romans built 2 main north-south and east-west thoroughfares that intersected at the Forum Magnum, or the Great Forum, which was a large open space surrounded by government buildings and temples. The Romans also constructed a number of aqueducts to bring fresh water from the surrounding countryside into the city. The largest of these was the Aqua Appia, completed in 312 BC, which brought water from the Via Appia to the Great Forum and other public buildings. But as Rome grew, the supply of water from the surrounding countryside couldn't keep up with demand. To solve this problem, the Romans built a series of public baths where people could bathe themselves and wash their clothes. Some of the largest of these were the baths of Caracalla and the baths of Diocletian, which had the capacity to serve over 1,600 bathers at a time. And to supply all those people with fresh food, Rome boasted several large markets where vendors sold everything from fresh produce to exotic spices. The largest of these was the Temple of the 12 Gods, which was built in the 1st century BC and contained a variety of goods from all over the empire. In addition to the markets, there were also a few specialized shopping districts in ancient Rome. The most famous of these was the Via Sacra, or Sacred Way, which was a street lined with shops and businesses. The Via Sacra was the site of many important government buildings, including the Temple of Venus Genetrix and the House of Augustus. It was also home to a number of wealthy merchants and business owners. Another popular shopping district was the Via Fori, or Forum Street, which ran along the Forum Magnum. This street was home to a number of important temples, including the Temple of Saturn and the Temple of Vespasian. It was also the site of several public buildings, such as the Basilica Aemilia and the Basilica Aemilia. The Via Lata, or Wide Street, was another popular shopping destination in ancient Rome. It was home to a number of important monuments, including the Pantheon and the Temple of Minerva. It was also the site of several public buildings, such as the Basilica Julia and the Basilica Caracalla. Of course, not everyone could afford to live in the city center. So many Romans lived in the suburbs, which in ancient Rome were called the subura. In the subura, there were a number of large apartment complexes called insulae, which were typically 5 or 6 stories tall and housed hundreds of families. These complexes were often overcrowded and unsanitary, but they were a necessary part of Roman life. Now, if you've watched any of our other videos on ancient Rome, then you know that the city was no stranger to fires, floods, and earthquakes. In fact, in the year 64 AD, a fire swept through Rome, destroying a large portion of the city. The fire lasted for 6 days and 4 nights and destroyed an estimated 10% of the city's buildings. It's believed that Emperor Nero took advantage of the chaos caused by the fire to confiscate land for himself. But the fire was only the beginning of Rome's problems. In the year 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted, covering the city of Pompeii in ash and burying it under 6 meters of debris. The eruption also killed thousands of people and destroyed an estimated 11,000 buildings. Despite these disasters, Rome continued to grow and thrive. The city reached its peak population in the 3rd century AD when it had an estimated 1 million inhabitants. However, this would be the last population peak for the city as it entered into a long period of decline. With all of that being said, let's jump forward a few centuries into the glory days of ancient Rome. You're strolling down the Via Sacra, or Sacred Way, the main street of ancient Rome, and you find yourself smack dab in the middle of a chariot race. You dodge a speeding chariot and casually walk past a vendor selling sweet pomegranate juice. All around you, people are going about their daily lives. Merchants hawk their wares, children run through the streets playing, and soldiers in full armor march past, heading to the barracks. You take a moment to admire the architecture around you. Many of the buildings are old and worn, but some are new and impressive. You pass a bakery and the smell of fresh bread makes your stomach rumble. You stop and buy a loaf, then find a shady spot to sit and eat. As you enjoy your snack, you watch the hustle and bustle of the city go by. A group of men carrying a litter pass by. The litter is covered, but you can hear the muffled cries of a woman inside. You learned from your tour guide that she's probably a prostitute, and the men are her clients. Further down the road, a group of soldiers marches past, followed by a crowd of civilians. They're taunting the soldiers, throwing things and shouting insults. You join in the jeering, not knowing that one day you might end up on the wrong side of their swords. Suddenly, a commotion breaks out in the distance. People are running and screaming, and the sound of shattering glass echoes through the streets. You turn and see a runaway chariot coming straight for you. It swerves at the last second, missing you by only a hair's breadth. As it comes to a stop, you see a beautiful woman step out. She's followed by a group of guards and soldiers. You recognize her as Julia Caesar, the daughter of the emperor. She's on her way to the palace, but she stops to talk to some admirers. You can't help but stare at her as she looks back at you and smiles. The crowd begins to thin, and you finally break away. You continue your stroll down the Via Sacra, taking in the sights and sounds of ancient Rome. You pass a group of men playing dice and you stop to watch for a moment. They're betting heavily on the outcome of the game and the stakes are getting higher and higher. You move on, shaking your head at their foolishness. Ahead of you, you see a group of people gathered around a fountain. You join them and marvel at the beauty of the water cascading down the stonework. It's a welcome sight in the heat of the Roman summer. As you make your way through the crowd, you hear the sound of drums and cymbals. Looking up, you see a group of musicians on a nearby roof. They're playing a lively tune and the sound echoes through the streets. You stop to listen for a moment, then break away and continue your stroll. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the city. You stop to watch the sky turn from blue to purple to black. The stars begin to appear and the moon rises high in the sky. You continue your stroll down the Via Sacra. The crowds have thinned and the shops are closing for the night. You find a small tavern and decide to call it a night. As you enter, you're greeted by the smell of stale urine and sweat. The room is dark and smoky, but there's a group of men playing cards in the corner. You order a drink and sit down to watch. The men are playing a Roman version of poker, and the stakes are high. One of the players wins a large pile of coins, and the others groan in frustration. You shake your head and take another drink. Suddenly, a fight breaks out between two of the players. The tavern keeper tries to stop them, but the men are too angry. Soon, the whole place erupts into chaos, and you find yourself in the middle of a brawl. You try to stay out of it, but you get hit in the face accidentally. You wipe the blood from your nose and mouth and make a quick exit. The noise and commotion of the tavern is replaced by the quiet of the night. You walk the deserted streets, feeling the cool evening air on your skin. You come to a small park and sit down on a bench to rest. As you look around, you realize that you're alone in the park. The darkness is broken only by the light of the moon and the distant glow of a street lamp. You feel a sudden sense of unease, and you start to walk again. You hurry down the street, eager to get home. You reach your house and quickly unlock the door. You stumble inside, grateful to be safe. You lock the door behind you and let out a sigh of relief. Today, you got a glimpse into the busy and exciting life of a Roman citizen. From the bustling markets to the smoky taverns, you experienced the best and worst of ancient Rome. But now, it's time to go. The spirit of Rome is strong here, and it's hard to say goodbye. But don't worry. You'll be back soon to explore more of this ancient city. Until then, remember that Rome was never far from the action.